All right. Welcome back to Remote Work Bay. I have Natasha Wang all the way from LA here with us today. How are you doing, Natasha?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I feel like it's so hard to catch you in LA because normally you're all over the world pre-pandemic. You know,
Yeah.
how's it like being at home for this last year?
Uh, I've actually really liked it. It's the one silver lining. Well, there's a couple of silver linings from the pandemic here, but one of the big ones is taking advantage of all this time at home and being with my cats and my husband and establishing sort of like a regular life and training schedule at home because as you know, you travel a lot, and when you travel it sort of upends your personal relationships and sort of the momentum that you have gotten in your training while you're at home. So
Yep.
it's nice to just have that consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so, just to give everyone a little bit of a background about, who you are and what you do, did you want to just tell everybody a little bit about, your career and what that's been like and how it's kind of pivoted in the last year?
Sure. Yeah. I've been teaching pole fitness, pole dance since about 2010. Prior to that, I was working in public relations for 9 years, and I quit that job to teach pole full time. And prior to the pandemic, I was primarily traveling and teaching workshops and pole retreats and judging competitions
Mhm.
and occasionally performing. And I was doing that pretty much around the world, probably 60 to 70% of the year. I think there was one year when it was like 75% of the year I was traveling, and that was not a good situation. So I've cut back on it drastically.
Mhm.
Yeah, then the pandemic hit, and of course, all my travel dates and tours and camps were all canceled.
Yeah.
And I've just been teaching virtually from home. And the studios in Los Angeles, the gyms recently opened about a month ago. So teaching a few live classes a week.
Amazing. So, how long have you been pole dancing in?
I started in 2005.
Wow. Wow. I mean, the industry must have been so different back
Yeah.
in the day. How did you get into pole dancing?
I had a friend of mine who saw Sheila Kelly of Sheila Kelly's S Factor,
Yep.
one of the first studios that opened in the world. Saw her on Oprah and
Yeah.
persuaded me to join her in an intro class. And so I went. And at the time, I wasn't exercising. I don't have a background in fitness or dance or gymnastics or anything really physical. So I figured, at the time I was almost 30, I think it was like 29 or 30, um,
Mhm.
wasn't living a very healthy lifestyle, had really bad habits, and took my first pole class and didn't hate it. So I continued. That was the barometer for fitness. If I didn't hate it, then it was like, okay, then I'll stick with it, because I hated pretty much everything else I did.
I didn't even know what you look like when you were unfit because you're so ripped.
I had very skinny arms, and yeah, I was like this big
Oh
and
my
really
gosh.
skinny and
Yeah.
no muscle tone.
So fascinating. So you didn't do any type of exercise prior to pole dancing?
No, I played
Huh.
volleyball up until
Okay.
my junior year of high school. But
Mm,
I was a bench warmer, and I had a really bad experience with team sports, just, sort of not feeling like I belonged. I went to a primarily white school in Austin, Texas. I think I
mm.
was one of maybe 4 or 5 Asians in my school. And
Wow.
we had 2 Black kids. We had a few Latinx students, but it was very predominantly white. And I think, when you're growing up in that kind of environment and you're playing team sports and you already don't feel like you belong,
Yeah.
and when you're horrible at team sports, you feel even more of an outsider. So, yeah,
Oh,
I didn't thrive in sports. And so after I quit the team, I was like, I'm never going to exercise again.
wow. Wow. That must have been traumatizing. My gosh.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
The fact that you're like, no more, none of this.
Yeah.
It's funny because that's my experience with music. As any tiger mom, I had a tiger mother, would make their children basically play piano. It was
Mhm.
so, I mean, it was it was one of those things I dreaded as a child.
Yeah.
And I haven't touched one since. And I played for 13 years. It's
I played
pretty crazy.
violin from the age of 8. I only played until I was 18. So I played
Okay.
for 10 years, but I can totally relate. So I take it you were not musically inclined.
No, no,
Yeah.
I was not. And I think as a child, I just didn't really understand, why I had to practice so many hours a day. And, Asian parents don't really explain it to you. They're just like, this is what you do and you have to do it. And
Right.
so I just didn't look forward to it.
Yeah.
And I guess if I was really good, that'd be a different story. But,
Yeah. It's funny though, because you were a dancer, so like that musical ability is in you. It just
mm,
takes form in a different fashion. And I feel like I was the same, like I'm not a dancer. Like I need to really learn how to count music because I still can't really count music that well. But like I feel the music, you
yep,
feel the music, you're a dancer. So, it's in there somewhere. It just never manifested in actually creating the actual music itself. You just embodied it physically.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I wonder sometimes, I'm like, what if I try again? I wonder like, how much of it would I remember,
Yeah.
how much, would I like it more now as an
Mhm.
adult and making that choice? And
Mhm.
it's, I knew at a very young age, I loved, so opposite to you, I love dance. I love sports. Um, I was actually a competitive figure skater growing up.
Know that. Oh,
And
wow.
so, and you know what it is? I think I've always been a rebel, and
Mhm.
dance and movement are the things I chose for myself as a child. But everything else, my parents were like, "You're doing this."
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah.
So it could
I
have
would,
been that. It could have
yeah.
been that mentality of I want to be, I want to make those choices on my own. And I just gravitated towards movement arts.
Yeah. But your parents nurtured that. I mean, they put you in the classes, they,
I was like, I want to ice skate. I remember I was 4. I was like, I want to ice skate. We had a rink, 5 minutes down the street, and I'm like, I want to do that. My
yeah.
parents were like, why would you want to do something like this?
Those that are so dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those sports where, I guess like Asian parents didn't really understand. They understood ballet. So they're like, okay, you're going to the ballet at 3. But
Mhm.
when it comes to figure skating, they're like, huh? Like,
Yeah.
why this of all things?
The irony, though, is that there are so many Asian figure skating champions
Yep.
and role models. It's such a popular sport
Mhm.
with Asian Americans and Asians around the world.
Yeah. I mean, Michelle Kwan was a role model for me,
Yeah,
growing up my entire life, and was like, wow, I want to be like her.
yeah,
So I'm grateful that I had that role model growing up, because not everybody does,
hmm,
especially living and growing up in America.
right. Yeah, I wish my parents had seen my well. So I was always like a backyard gymnast. Like
Mm,
I taught myself how to do back walkovers and back handsprings and I remember like practicing it on my couch, going to a back bend and kicking over and then finally being able to do it on my own
nice.
and they did put me in gymnastics when I was 11 and I think at that point I was just too old. Like I had another
Mm,
friend, a family friend, and I would join her and her sister were
yeah.
like these little Mongolian, I mean they were Chinese. So they weren't Mongolian. They're
Yeah.
like Chinese acrobats, just like
Wow.
doing crazy things. And I went to gymnastics with them. And I was also very traumatized because we were having to do back handsprings on the balance beam. And this was like my first gymnastics class, my first experience taking gymnastics classes. And I was
Yeah.
forced to do these things on a balance beam.
Uh-huh.
I just remember eating poo so bad and like racking myself. And it was so horrible that I was
No.
like, I'm never going back. And so, you know,
Uh,
I guess my parents, they took me to the gymnastics classes. And I guess when it didn't pan out, then
they're like,
they
okay, never mind.
encouraged me to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. You go through those incidences, and I guess like that's where your parents, I mean, nature versus nurture, it's like, where do they come into play? You
Yeah.
know, are they going to be like, Natasha, dust yourself off and just
Right.
keep going? Or
Yeah.
are they the type of parents that are like, okay, she doesn't like it next type of
Yeah.
situation?
My parents were kind of like that. They were very easygoing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, you still found your sport, as an adult.
Eventually.
I mean, it's so inspiring because coming from, similar circus background as well, people ask me all the time. They're like, am I too old to do this? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. It's half the people I train with are older than me and
Yeah.
significantly better than me. So it's like, it really, I mean, it's super interesting. I mean, speaking of, just stigma and like going into, like what the Asian viewpoint of pole dancing is. At what point did you tell your parents this is how you want to shift your career? And how did you deal with the stigma of being a pole dancer, especially so long ago? Maybe in the last decade, right? Pole really, really emerged as a fad, right? Like a fitness fad, right? It's still here. But 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would never consider this as a career. Like, how was that shift like with your parents and then just, with your community?
Yeah. Well, I told my mom that I was taking pole classes.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was maybe like in 2010. I'd already started competing at that point.
Okay.
And she came to visit me. She was living in Taiwan and she came to visit me. And I have this pole in
Yeah.
my dining room area. And she kind of walked by it and she didn't say anything for like, the first day she arrived. And then she kind of walked up to it and she like did this like circle and kind of like did a swing around it. She's like, oh, this
Oh,
is fun. And so then I was like, okay, well, I should probably tell her that I've been taking pole classes. And I took her back in the day in Los Angeles. There used to be this bar. It was like this little dive bar, and I can't remember
uh-huh.
the name, but they had this event called Medicinal Mondays. I don't know
Hmm.
if you remember this.
Oh, no.
This was like 12 years ago,
Yeah.
and it was a like open pole night, and I'd performed already there a couple of times,
Wow.
and I was going to go there to see some friends,
Hmm.
and I told my mom, oh, I just started taking pole classes like a month ago. At that
Yeah.
point, I'd already been performing and competing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And we arrive, and of course, I know everyone, and everyone's coming talking to me. And my mom's like, "Wow, you just started a month ago, and you already know all these people. Like, this is such a great community. They're so
Yeah.
funny." Um, and then afterwards, like, "Oh, actually, I've been pole dancing for 6 years or whatever."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I won a competition called the California Pole Dance Championships.
Yeah.
And then I told my dad. And
Uh,
my dad is a little bit more conservative than my mom. Um,
mm,
but he comes from a movement background. Like he's been teaching Kung Fu since the early 70s.
mm,
So, once I showed him the video, he was sort of like, oh, wow, because at first he was like, pole dancing,
yeah.
I don't think you should be doing this.
Yes.
Um, because he's an old Chinese guy.
Yeah.
And then I showed him the video and he was like, wow, this is amazing.
Mm,
So yeah, I never really, I never really faced a lot of, I think maybe I didn't care. And
mm,
B, by the time I was really open about pole dancing, I'd already quit my job.
mhm,
When I was working in PR, I was kind of keeping this hobby private, because I
mm,
worked in entertainment technology and I had a lot of clients who were, men, and I just wanted to keep those two worlds separate.
yeah.
So I went by, a stage name, and
Mm,
but then when I quit my job, it was sort of like, nah, I don't care who
okay.
knows. I don't care what they think. And so
Mhm.
what if they think I'm a stripper? That's cool.
Yeah, you're like, great.
It's hard work. So,
It is hard
but
work. Mhm.
yeah, but I think back then it was different. I think a lot of people who did pole fitness back then were very much of the mentality that they wanted to separate themselves from strippers. And I think as this sport has evolved, the people back then who really were ardent about keeping that separation now are like, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong to have felt that if somebody thought that I was a stripper, that was some sort of stigma.
Mm.
I think the language around it has evolved in the years since.
Gosh, there's so much in what you just said. Well, first of all, I have a secondary question to your shift when you quit your PR job to being a pole dancer. How were you able to feed yourself? I mean, I'm like, honestly, because being in tech and PR, I mean, the wages are significantly higher, especially in a city like LA and how expensive it is. Um, how did you deal with finances in that shift?
Well, when I quit my job, it wasn't one of those like, oh, I'm gonna, I have nothing lined up. I'm just gonna try and see if it works. I mean, it was actually when you won a competition in 2011, which is when I
Okay,
won the US championships,
got
like
it.
it was a big deal. Like you could make some serious money. I had xpole as a sponsor. They were sort of paying me a
Mm,
monthly fee. And I, one of the reasons why I quit my job was because I had lined up so many teaching gigs and tours that I was like looking at my calendar and I can't keep my job
mm,
and travel and take advantage of these opportunities. So I'm going to have to choose one or the other.
mhm.
And it was really lucrative. Like in the first couple of years, I mean, there was maybe 1 year where I made more than at my previous job, but
Amazing.
it was close and I
Mhm.
was having a lot of fun and doing something that I loved. So, in terms of like, how did I feed myself? Pretty easily.
So
um,
interesting.
yeah.
Do you think that it's because you won nationals and you were so visible and that's what propelled you within this industry? Because I mean, I'm just asking because I'm sure there's pole dancers out there that want to make this a career. It's probably a little different, you
Yeah.
know, right? Because I mean, how like I would assume in order to make money, you'd be gigging. If you weren't a champion pole dancer, you'd probably be gigging and like possibly teaching, right? But do you have advice for artists in general that don't have the visibility that you do?
Well, I think now, it's such a different world. Like when I was traveling, I can't even, yeah, there was Facebook, but there was certainly not, there was not, there was no Instagram. I think people still went to YouTube to watch videos, but I feel like now the opportunities for people who are just starting out in this field and who want to make it are
Mhm.
huge, because if you're tech savvy and you're social medially, I don't even know if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
if you're savvy with social media, you could not even compete and yeah, and not even perform and
Mhm.
still gain a massive following because you just know how to speak to the right people. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so I think there are definitely advantages of starting out in the industry now, not to mention that all the people who came before you who like paved the way built this foundation of knowledge that is so easily acquired now. Like,
Mhm.
15 years ago, like we were making up stuff all the time and we were not claiming the moves or hashtagging them on social media or anything, we were just sort of creating the stuff.
Yep.
Um, and today you just go onto Instagram and you could learn something new in, a few seconds, which is,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Really
So
true.
there's a lot more opportunities now. I mean, of course, there's a lot more competition. There's a lot more people who are doing the sport
Yeah.
and trying to make it
Mm.
than when I was first starting out. So
Yeah.
that in itself is kind of a disadvantage, but it also pushes you to innovate and be better and be a better teacher, be a better performer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that for trailblazers like yourself, you've really paved the way for a lot of these other pole dancers to merge into the field. And speaking of which, I mean, it's Asian American History Month. We were talking about visibility with Asian Americans in all walks of life, right? And as in America, and you are a trailblazer in the pole industry and probably the first Asian American I've seen in this field. What does the symbolism of that mean to you? And what would you want to tell other Asian Americans that are trying to pursue this as a career?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think culturally, a lot of Asian Americans grow up with this pressure to be the good girl, to get good grades, to play piano, play violin, to be, obedient and polite and quiet. And, I don't think our parents taught us to be submissive, but, there's the expectation of Asian women as being, these docile creatures. And, so I think Asian women in America grow up with these expectations of how they should be. And I think for a lot of them, pole dancing sort of upends all of that. And
Mm.
I think a lot of Asian American women are attracted to pole dancing because it is maybe, a little bit subversive and goes against, maybe what their parents would want for them,
Yeah.
and so in that way, it's very liberating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, not to get into the whole like, oh, pole is an actual sport sort of thing, but I think definitely like I've spoken to a lot of Asian pole dancers, not just in the US, but also abroad in Asia.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have said, oh, I got into pole dancing because I saw you on TV, or I came across a YouTube video of you. And I was like, oh, an Asian woman can also do well in this sport. It's not just
Mhm.
for, um, 5'8" super strong Westerners or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, for all people of color, when they see somebody in a sport or an industry who looks like them, they feel like, okay, well, maybe this is something that I can explore too.
Do you like, what do you see as differences when you are in Asia versus America? Is it like, is there a different, like culturally, do they practice differently? Technically, do they practice differently? Are the styles different from country to country? Since you've basically trekked the globe and visited, most of the pole studios around the world. How has that been like in the differences between all those different studios in the different regions?
Hmm. Well, without like generalizing too much, like when I was I don't know, in Japan, I noticed that the Japanese pole dancers are very like they're daredevils.
Oh,
They
interesting.
spin really fast. They love doing all these crazy flips.
Huh.
Um, they're they're like in their performances, they love these like really elaborate costumes and
Wow.
characters, and so they're really like kind of extra in that way, which is, you wonder because, typically Japanese culture is, fairly reserved.
Yeah.
So, but on stage, it's like they're completely the opposite. They go into like crazy panic.
Fascinating.
So it's really interesting.
Huh.
Um,
Wow.
and in Korea is interesting because I taught there for the first time in, I want to say 2013.
Okay.
And it was, they had their first Korean pole championships.
Mm.
And when I went to teach workshops there, the level was really beginner level. I think pole had maybe, just kind of gained popularity
Right, right.
a year prior, which was like really late compared to a lot of other countries. Like in Japan, they've had pole studios since probably 2006, 2007.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and so in Korea, it was very new. So then there was like maybe 3 or 4 years where I didn't go back to Korea, South Korea. And then when I went back again, it was a completely different
Hmm.
landscape. Like they were so good.
Wow.
Like I think what happened in South Korea was that maybe there was a girl group that started doing pole dancing in their shows. And so of course, then everybody wanted to take pole dancing classes because
Mm.
famous girl group was doing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and now the level there, they're some of the best in Asia. They're
Amazing.
very elegant and very flexible,
Mm.
um, very beautiful. it's kind of interesting because in South Korea, there's very much delineation between like a very feminine style
Yeah.
that the women do, and then the men are very macho, and a lot of them are very influenced by like b-boy culture because, you know.
Well, you know what's really interesting? I don't know if you know this, but the Korean government actually sponsors, they subsidize a lot of these break dancers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why there's so many incredible dancers that come out of Korea. So there are some sort of government scholarship sponsorship programs for artists in
Mm-hmm.
Korea. And so that'd be interesting to see if they sponsor any of the pole dancers there. That would be very interesting to do some
Yeah.
research on that. But I know that they do sponsor break dancers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're called, I think the Tong Hen.
What is he?
He's like he's one of the most famous b-boys. Like he won like one of the big b-boy competitions.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Korean.
he's Korean. I think one of
Yeah.
his name's Song Han. Anyways, but he was teaching at a pole camp that I was attending.
Oh,
So
so
but,
fascinating.
mhm.
I mean, I could see how they correlate, a lot of the flow, groundwork, leg work
Yeah.
that breakdancers do. I mean, it's like that that handstand movement you were showing me. It's like that looks like it's someone that does parkour or breakdancing,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Well,
And
a
it's
lot of those worlds, like fuse together. It's like yoga and
Mhm.
parkour and capoeira and martial arts and gymnastics and rhythmic gymnastics and ice skating. I have some friends who were former competitive ice skaters, and they're incredible at the pole because it's that whole spinning motion, creating shapes and using momentum. And but yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's been so much talk in the last couple of years of bringing pole in as an Olympic sport. Do you think that's going to ever happen?
There's been traction there. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what did they recently? Skateboarding is an Olympic sport now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of you watching that's never climbed a pole or touched a pole, it's really humbling. It's very humbling. It's extremely difficult, and people like you just make it look really easy. So it's what I'm saying, and that's your job to make it look easy. You've been doing it for so many years, but it's so difficult. Even like a basic spin, basic spin, or a pirouette around the world or whatever, even floor work. Everything is difficult.
Yeah.
Every part of pole dancing is extremely difficult. So it'd be very interesting to see if, one day pole actually made it to the Olympics, like how they would judge, judge that performance. Because I mean, we have rhythmic gymnastics. There's a lot of things that are, could be very subjective.
Yes. Yeah. So I would imagine that they would judge it similar to how they judge the pole sport competitions, which is very much on a gymnastics point basis, where certain moves are equate to a certain number of points, and then you submit your routine with the moves and the points allotted to them. And if you don't complete that one move, then you don't get that point. So, they have a pretty standardized system of judging the technical aspect. But yeah, if you're judging the choreography and the artistic elements, then that's always going to be subjective, whether you're judging figure skating or rhythmic gymnastics. So.
Tell us a little bit more about the point system for pole competitions. I mean, it's fascinating. Like, break that down for us. What is the ratio between creative and the technical aspects? And I know there's like many divisions as well. So there's like the professional, dramatic, what else is there? Theatrical, right?
Comedy.
Yeah, exactly. So what does that look like when you compete?
It depends on it depends on the kind of competition that you're competing in. If you're doing something that's pole sport,
Yeah.
then it's going to be more heavily skewed towards the technical aspect. So, you know, how flexible you are, how strong you are, how crazy your flips are, and all that stuff. Whereas if you're competing in something called, there's a pole theater and pole
Yeah.
art competitions, and
Uh-huh.
they skew more towards pole theater. They've got different divisions, but it's usually more of the performance that counts. The pole art, it's usually the expression and the choreography that counts. So it really depends on the kind of pole competition that you're competing in. But yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Did you compete in pole sport? Is that your okay?
no, that not the competition for me.
Yeah.
When I was competing a lot, I was asked to compete in pole sport. And
Uh-huh.
you know, in retrospect, I kind of regret not doing it because I think it would have been a great challenge. But it's just not for me. I mean, it's interesting though, because I think the pole sport competitions, it's usually the routines that win may not necessarily have been
Uh-huh.
the most technically difficult, but it's the ones that choreograph it in the smartest way, right? So you're putting in elements. Okay, well, if I put this in element that I know I can do really well, I'm going to get this number of points. Then I'll fill it in with a bunch of these other ones that are not as difficult, but I know I will be able to achieve, and then I'll get guaranteed these points. Whereas sometimes people put these routines together and they're like, okay, I'm going to do maximum point this move, maximum point, and then they don't end up nailing any of them. And so they do worse than somebody who is really smart and puts a routine together that's clean and maybe not as difficult. So, but no, I never.
Yeah. What style did you compete in?
Well, I'm not a dancer, so I can't really say that I'm like, you know, more of like a pole art. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of like a mix between like pole art and like sport. And more on the art side. But
Yeah.
like the international competition that I won was the oh my God, now I can't even remember the name. Oh my God. It's the pole championships. It's the one IPC. I was going to say
Oh
IPA.
yes.
Thinking of
Yes.
so IPC, which is the International Pole Championships, and that competition is much more like the show and the overall package. And the last time I competed in that, I won the pole art division of it.
Ah, interesting. I mean, I would have never known because I feel like you're so strong that you would be able to do a lot of the pole sport, technical moves, and it would have been,
Old.
what is it?
I'm old.
Oh
I
my gosh, no.
don't want to do those like really crazy. I mean, I used to, and I could probably do it for the gram like once, you know. But I'm not going to put a routine and then do some move where, you know, every time I'm about to go into it, I pray that I don't kill myself, you know.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
I mean, speaking of which, I mean, I'm very curious. How has your body changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years? Pre-pole to when you started pole. I mean, and now, I mean, you're still, I mean, as from what I can see on IG, you're still improving so much and you're still learning new tricks, creating new tricks. And it still looks flawless and like you're getting stronger and stronger. I mean, what has that done to your body in the last 10, 20 years?
Well, prior to pole, you know, because I wasn't doing any physical activity, my body looked totally different. And if you go onto YouTube and you do a search, if you go to my YouTube account, which I don't ever post, it's like a what do they call it? It's like a zombie account where it's just like just I don't do anything with it. But there are some videos from there from when I first started competing, or like my first competition submission video, and I look like I'm like 12, like, you know, it's like skinny, scrawny little thing. I've got this like, whatever. Just look at it and it's really funny. But then when I was competing, you know, when you're an athlete, you lean out and you get really muscular and really big arms. And I was actually going back through on my video archive the other day to find new content to teach in my classes. And I'm watching these combos that I posted like in 2015. Just like, my jaw was on the floor. It's like, I can't believe that I was able to do all those things in quick succession.
Uh-huh.
And, I was doing all these moves that I don't even remember doing.
Wow.
But at the same time, I'm watching these videos, even though I was stronger, I
Mm.
don't think my movement was as refined as it is now. I'm not as strong now. I'm maybe not as flexible now. But I feel like there is a nuance in my movement now that I didn't have then.
Mm.
So, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm okay with getting older and not being able to do some of the crazy things that I did before,
Mm.
because I know that in place of those crazy things, I've built another kind of movement vocabulary that I think is better
Mm.
and more
Mm.
sustainable. And yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm 45 now. So I realize, at this age and, heading into late 40s and 50s, there's going to be some changes and, I'm ready for it.
Well, you look amazing,
Oh,
for 45, thanks to probably your fitness regimen and being Asian combined.
Asians are raisin. It's true.
Right, exactly. Wow, that's super, well, it's inspiring because, like it's like most people don't think that they can start something this difficult at an older age. Do you, I mean, do you have recommendations for people that are starting this as an adult? Um, you know, do you cross train? Do you have tips and tricks, for anyone that's interested in starting the sport?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So find a good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Find a teacher that knows about the human body, that knows about anatomy, that, preferably is somebody who has either, pole certification or dance background or gymnastics background, or they have their yoga certification or their personal trainer certification, somebody who's just put the time and money into learning about the body.
Mm.
Um, or they could have none of those certifications and just be a really good teacher. So
Mm.
throw out everything I just said. You could still be a
Yeah.
great teacher and not have any of those certifications, but just somebody who is going to know about the human body, and who knows how to work with adults. Because as you know, you and I have both worked with, flexibility trainers before, and some of them have always worked with children
Yeah.
who have very different bodies and very different ranges of motion and mobility. And then you have some who work with adults and they know the limitations
Mm.
of the adult human body. So yeah, so find a good teacher. And also, I think one pressure that a lot of the people who are doing, I think really any kind of sport, whether you're a dancer, a gymnast, a circus artist, a pole dancer, is today there's this pressure of social media. So I have a
Mm.
lot of students who, and I know a lot of people who I think will learn a move,
Mm.
just post it on social media, and then they wait for all the likes and all the comments and,
Yeah.
and they kill their bodies to get into this move that they may or may not ever do again, but they are so determined to get this move so they can post it to social media that they end up injuring themselves, or it's a move that's just not attainable for them because of anatomy or pre-existing injuries or whatever reason. So I think it's really important for anyone who's in the movement world to not live on social media 24 hours a day,
Yeah.
and to remember why they started movement in the first place, to fulfill personal joy and for health, and it's not to to be insta famous. I don't know, maybe some people go into it to be insta famous, but
Mm-hmm.
most people
Yeah.
don't go into a movement discipline for that reason. So
Yeah, it's interesting how much social media has played a part. Actually, even in, um, the evolution of industries like pole, right?
yes.
And where that's gone. And, like you said, anyone can just used to go onto YouTube and now Instagram and can, potentially learn how to do something on their own at home. But I think that's my big piece of advice as well as a teacher in general, is that you just don't know. You don't have a spotter. You don't know how, where the weight ratio is, what exact, muscles you should be engaging to get into those shapes. And it could get really dangerous.
Oh yeah,
Like
very dangerous.
really dangerous, especially with a sport like pole.
Yes.
So I agree with you. Absolutely. And I'm sure I've done it a couple of times myself. I'm like, I want to do this, right? But half the time, right? Like coming from, contortion and flexibility background, who knew that you needed active flexibility to do a lot of this too, right? I'm like, I have a lot of passive flexibility, but, after all of these years of training and teaching, I'm like, okay, it's not that I'm not flexible enough. I just have to get stronger to get into some of these poses and
Right.
tricks. But
Right.
a normal person that hasn't trained or aware of their body would not know that,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
And not only that, like I think it's also a mental, there's something that happens mentally when you have been doing something for a long time and when you're in something, safety measures for how to, for example, bail out of a move
Yeah.
safely.
Yeah.
Where it's like if you don't have that experience and you're going into something very difficult, your first reaction may be just to let everything go and just release. And you may not have a crash mat underneath you. You may be super high, so it's also programming your brain to be like, okay, how am I going to assess this potentially dangerous situation and come out of it safely and not injure myself?
I mean, going into that, I know you've been teaching online in the last year. How are you? What is the difference between, like basically teaching someone online versus in person? And what type of precautions do you give people as they're doing these at-home trainings?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things that I teach that I used to teach in person that I don't teach anymore virtually. Like
Mhm.
there's certain moves like I would never teach a begin, or like somebody has never done, there's a move called a handspring. That's basically like a cartwheel where you're holding onto the pole and you're going upside down,
Yeah.
like as if you're going into a cartwheel. And I just don't feel comfortable teaching moves like that
Mhm.
virtually. So I've modified a lot of things that I used to teach, and I've basically pared them down to like the essential components. And now I'm
Uh,
like super nerdy, but like paring them down and then finding ways to do it like from a seated position on the floor first. You make that shape and then you try it on the pole, maybe like an inch off the floor. And then maybe once you're confident, you go a little higher. But it's about like deducing a difficult move into little bite-sized pieces and then
mhm.
progressing eventually to get to this more advanced move.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, it's actually made me a better teacher. Like it's forced me to
Like break it
think
down.
to think very analytically and always with safety in mind.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would assume you would have to. How about for people that are just taking those, the free Facebook, IG live classes? Potentially, basically anyone can be a teacher now, on especially this last year, with the evolution of people training from home. What type of advice can you give people that may not be taking class from someone that's breaking those steps down for them? Like what can they do as a safety precaution?
Well, I think a lot of it boils down to sort of personal responsibility and knowing, being able to discern yourself whether it is something that you can or cannot do. And I know that can be hard. Like we've all watched American Idol auditions and seen people who are auditioning who can't sing, but they think they can sing, and that happens in pole where there are people who are like, oh yeah, they watch somebody do something like, I can do that, but they can't do even the basic, they can't do an invert and they want to do a flip,
Oh,
so
gosh.
it's risky because inevitably you are going to be reaching some of those people
Mhm.
who see something that you're teaching and say, I can do that, and they've never touched a pole before.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't want to say don't take classes from these people because
Mhm.
I believe that everyone has something to give as a teacher. And it's not my place to be like, you shouldn't take classes from that person. That person doesn't know what they're doing. It's sort of like, as the consumer / student / client, we also need to be able to
be cognizant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, be cognizant and know.
Do your research, and yeah, 100% agree. So I would actually, here's a fun question. I'm very curious as to what you're working on right now. You're a teacher, but you're a student for life. What are you working on? And is there like a specific trick or move that you've been trying to execute and get?
Well, we meet once a week virtually. So for everyone out there, Audrey and I we've been meeting once a week through Zoom for the entire quarantine year. And we do a handstands training practice. So I'd love to get a one-handed handstand. That's kind of what I'm working on. Well, I mean, but I'm not really working on it.
Yeah.
If I was, then I would actually be working on it, but I would love to be able to do it one day. But in terms of like pole, it's so weird because so much of my training is to develop content that I can teach. So for me to like think selfishly, like, oh, I want to learn this for myself, like I haven't thought that way in a long time. It's always like, okay, I want to learn this so I can eventually teach this, or teach a variation of it, or
interesting.
I'm working on like business stuff. Like,
tell us.
I'm for a couple of months, I've been putting together the pieces for like an on-demand platform. So basically just like a subscription model. Nice. Where if people want to train with me, they can train with me. Yeah, I've been filming a lot of tutorials and filming a lot of like little workshops and programs and stuff for this thing that is hopefully launching in June.
Nice.
So there's been a lot of stuff on the back end, like professional development stuff that I've been doing.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean, it's a really great way to monetize, because it's not just you physically having to be there to teach that class, but to sell something that's, where anyone can get a little bit of a Natasha Wang, at any time, at any point in time. That's super exciting.
We're in this weird in-between world right now where like the world's kind of opening, but not 100% yet. And then the virtual space is still going to continue. Like I have no doubt that for fitness or for virtual learning in general, that that virtual is going to be sticking around. But, I think as the world has opened, people are wanting to spend less time in virtual classes. So it's weird, like having to pivot, pivoting at the beginning of quarantine, then pivoting now. And then, so a lot of
you'll have both, which is very exciting, whether it be someone that, enjoys training at home because, they've been doing it for the last year, or people wanting to go back into the studio. I mean, for me personally, I'm like, I really enjoy training at home now because I have my whole setup, so, I would be one of those consumers that's like, okay, let me do it on my own time. Now that we can, and we've basically speeded the process of being able to work from anywhere or train from anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great addition to just your business in general.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of this aspect, this new addition, this new vertical of your business, do you see yourself, I guess, like traveling or workshopping less, teaching less, because you have, this on-demand videos that are coming out?
Well, that's kind of the hope, right? Is that I can travel less. The bookings are starting up again. I'm teaching at a camp in Honolulu in September, October. It was a camp that was originally scheduled for last spring and had to be moved.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some travel this year, but it's just hard. It's hard to live that lifestyle, to constantly live out of a suitcase, and, it's hard on your body. It's hard on your emotions and your relationships. And so I'm looking forward to finding ways to make an income and make a living and be local for a bit.
Well, we're happy to have you here in LA. I mean, where can people find you?
My Instagram is Pole Cricket.
Pole Cricket.
OLE and then cricket, like the insect.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably where I update the most. Facebook, I don't, do people still use Facebook? I'm hardly on there.
Yeah.
And my website is natashawang.com, which also needs to be updated. So that's on my to-do list.
Easy peasy. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I'm excited to see where your journey takes you. I mean, it's like, it's so inspiring following you.
Thanks.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. I will see you on Zoom for handstands.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey.
Thanks, Natasha.